Just a stone's throw away from town is a high valley that funnels cool breezes from the peaks of the olaus down to Honolulu. This valley is the site of the famous Kaleleaka anae, Kamehameha's final decisive battle to overtake Oahu. But it also contains the site of a few famous haunted houses. Uanu is our destination in this episode of Hawaii's Most Haunted. Beyond the cool waters and trade winds of our idealistic paradise is the thin veil that separates our world from the place where the shadows talk back. Welcome to Hawaii's Most Haunted. Everyone knows that Uanu Valley is haunted. Of course, you have your standard spooky sites like the Pele Lookout, Morgan's Corner, and several cemeteries and graveyards. And then you have the sites of traumatic events like Kaleleaka, also known as the Battle of Uanu, the bloody battle that made its way up the valley, culminating at the Pele. But the valley is reportedly home to a number of documented haunted houses as well. Back in 1857, the local newspaper reported a ghost story in Uanu. As the story says, the apparition first made its appearance to a Hawaiian woman whose husband had died some months before. She claims that it is his ghost she sees. Later, the specter made a second appearance, this time in front of a group of Hawaiians. They all fled at the sight except the ghost's apparent wife, who says she was deprived of all power of motion. After a considerable time had elapsed, the woman rejoined her trembling companions, but on being questioned, refused to impart what had passed between her and the specter of her husband. Our next story comes from an article posted in 1928. The person who reported it originally wrote into the newspaper from California, but it concerned a haunted house in Uanu Valley that they lived in while in Hawaii. The person wrote that on her first night they'd slept in the house, they purposely left the table lamp on. Around midnight, he woke up and someone had turned the light off. He assumed his sister had done it and turned it back on. The night seemed so long and strange, he said. I dozed off again and woke up and the light was off. I turned it on again, angry that someone was checking my light and maybe trying to save a penny on the electric bill. But no one had turned off the light. The house was so quiet, and his sister and her family were sound asleep in the other bedrooms. The man said that he felt a presence in the house, so he got up and turned on the ceiling light and went to the kitchen. He said suddenly, the room was filled with thousands of colored shapes like balloons coming down from the ceiling. He thought his mind and eyes were deceiving him. It was 2 a.m. on the clock. He stayed up the rest of the night. The next morning, he told no one about what happened and kept telling himself it was his imagination. But as soon as he walked into the bedroom, he was afraid. He told his sister he couldn't sleep in that room, but didn't explain why. She suggested he sleep on the couch in the living room, and she would leave her bedroom door open. Alone on the couch, with the light off, he felt happy and safe. But only for 5 minutes. There she was, he explained. She jumped on top of my bed. Her hair was wiry. I felt her hands. The hands of a little girl. He screamed and jumped out of bed, thoroughly frightened. He flooded the house with light, realizing that they had a haunted house. The man said that his sister's boy said that he'd seen people there, although there was no one. He was 7. After the man left the sister's place, his friend arrived for the weekend. She stayed in the front room, like the woman's brother did before her. She had the same experience. However, the little ghost girl came through the window, laughed eerily, and then jumped on the bed. The woman wasn't frightened, as the writer explained, that she had a small daughter who passed away a few years before, and she thought her daughter was giving her a message. After that, the man's sister quickly decided to move. And now, a more well-known house that has been reported to be haunted. In 1902, an article appeared in the local newspaper that described an old house in Uanu Valley. The report said that the house would in all probability, if situated on the mainland, come under the jurisdiction of the Society for Psychical Research. So numerous, so authenticated, and so inexplicable are the tales of weird happenings that have occurred almost continually as far back as the memory of the oldest inhabitant can carry. The newspaper called this house a veritable halilapu, or ghost hall. In this place, echoing footsteps of invisible persons would be heard every twilight evening and through the night. Ghostly visitants have been witnessed and felt by visitors to the mansion. At one point, the house had been vacant for some years. It was described as an empty house with dusty windows, like dead eyes, with untrimmed gardens and yawning shutters, seeming to describe the perfect visual suggestion of a haunted house. But the hauntings were reported by people who were not known for silly stories of uncanny encounters. William T. Seward, also known as Major Seward, was a man well known in Hawaii. It is said that he slept in the house and awoke in the middle of the night. He saw a Hawaiian woman with a regal carriage, and a female attendant wearing a veil was with her. The Major attempted to get up, but he felt like some kind of cloth was thrown over his head from behind, and he was dragged back. He made another attempt to get up, and the Hawaiian woman thrust him back, grabbing his thigh. A third attempt resulted in the disappearance of the ghostly figures. The next day, Seward went swimming, and on his thigh was a black stain. It wasn't a bruise, he said, and it wasn't painful, but it would not wash off. The Major showed the mark to a friend who asked him where he'd slept overnight. His friend then informed him that it was a spook mark and brought bad luck. 2 months later, Major Seward was arraigned for treason. One young lady of a well-known family was sleeping in the room of the big hall. She awoke in the middle of the night to see by moonlight a disembodied head of a young Hawaiian boy laying beside hers. Another visitor, left alone in the house, went to bed peacefully in one room, but later woke to find himself in another room, wrapped in his blanket. A vacationing party of women with their young charges heard trunks and chairs pulled about the big hall, but could see nothing of the sort happening in front of them. The son of one of the former owners was seated at the billiard table, cutting out some papers. He felt his mother walk by, her skirt brushing against him as she passed. Out of the corner of his eye, the boy saw her exit the room. He called her back to show her his project, and after his third call, his mother appeared from an entirely different part of the house. One guest slept overnight in a small room with a screen. In the middle of the perfectly calm night, he was awakened by the heavy screen falling with a smash and watched as it was dragged across the floor. He explained that there was not a breath of wind stirring at the time. It is said that the adults and children in the neighborhood knew to stay away from the house. No mangoes were ever stolen from its yard. Parties to investigate the house and its terrors were formed, but no one ever stayed long. Parents sometimes forbade and sometimes went as far as fetching their children away from the house before nightfall. But no one who remained in the house was ever disappointed. Something always happened. The house's most famous inhabitants were often seen in later years as spectral entities, quietly walking through the old hall or one of the neighboring rooms. In one room, if a light was left on at night, visitors would see the ghost of His Royal Highness, King Kamehameha IV. The image of Prince Albert, his son, who passed away at the age of 5, is seen playing about. And of course, often seen wandering about her home. Emma, kalani kaumaka amano, kaleleo na lani, na ea rook, Queen of Hawaii.